In 1877, one man controlled a fortune so vast it would equal over $200 billion today, more than any American family had ever amassed. But within 2 generations, that legacy shattered. Mansions crumbled, heirs scattered, and an empire built on speed and steel vanished almost overnight. How does unimaginable wealth simply disappear? The answer begins with Cornelius Vanderbilt and a dynasty cursed by its own success. Cornelius Vanderbilt's death in January 1877 left the world staring at numbers no one had seen before. His estate, appraised at roughly $105 million, was not just the largest fortune in America. It was a sum so vast that it equaled about 1% of the entire U.S. economy at the time. To put this in modern perspective, that share of national wealth would be worth $200 billion today, outstripping the holdings of today's richest families. Newspapers struggled to capture the scale. One New York editorial called it a mountain of gold, higher than any yet seen in the New World. The bulk of this wealth came from Vanderbilt's near-total grip on the New York Central Railroad. By the end of his life, he owned 87% of the company's stock, a position that made him not just rich, but powerful enough to influence the direction of American commerce itself. The rest of the estate included cash reserves, smaller railroad lines, and shares in steamship companies, all meticulously recorded in probate ledgers that read more like the balance sheet of a small nation than a private citizen. The numbers alone staggered the imagination. Vanderbilt's $105 million estate was more than double the entire annual federal budget of the United States in 1877. His personal fortune could have paid the wages of every railroad worker in the country for years. Economists today debate the best way to measure such historic sums, but by the metric of GDP share, the slice of the national economic pie, no American family has ever held so much, not even the Rockefellers or the modern tech billionaires. Even within his own family, the sheer size of the inheritance created a sense of awe, and, for some, unease. Vanderbilt himself had warned against breaking the fortune into small pieces, fearing that division would weaken the family's power. Yet, with no legal mechanism to lock the wealth away for future generations, the estate stood as a single massive target, impressive but exposed. The story of what happened to this mountain of wealth would become a cautionary tale, but in 1877, it was still the summit of American ambition. Cornelius Vanderbilt's path to unimaginable wealth was anything but gentle. He started with a single ferry in New York Harbor and built an empire by outmaneuvering, undercutting, and absorbing his rivals. In the 1850s, he bought into steamship lines that ferried gold rush prospectors to California. During the fierce rate wars of 1869, Vanderbilt slashed freight prices from 3 cents to 1.5 cents per ton-mile. His competitors, unable to match his scale or absorb the losses, often ended up paying him just to leave their routes alone. By the height of the steamship era, his operations were generating annual profits of $30 million, a staggering sum for the time, but steam was only the beginning. Sensing the future lay on rails, Vanderbilt pivoted his fortune into the New York and Harlem Railroad, gaining full control by 1863. He didn't just buy stock, he bought out entire boards, sometimes using secret purchases and sometimes through outright market manipulation. The consolidation of the New York Central Railroad gave him a direct line from Manhattan to Chicago, the backbone of American commerce. By 1870, the New York Central was raising capital through bond issues that promised a 12% return on equity, nearly double what other railroads could offer. Investors lined up, knowing that Vanderbilt's iron grip on rates and routes made default almost impossible. He was ruthless in pursuit of dominance. When rivals tried to compete, he would flood the market with cheap fares, driving them to bankruptcy or forcing them to sell at a loss. In one famous episode, a competitor paid Vanderbilt hundreds of thousands of dollars just to stop running boats on a contested route. These tactics earned him the nickname Robber Baron, but they also built a machine that churned out cash year after year. The Vanderbilt fortune was not built on patience or moderation. It was built on speed, both in steam and steel, and on a willingness to do whatever it took to win. Every dollar in the estate's ledgers was a product of relentless ambition, calculated risk, and a refusal to share control. By the time Cornelius Vanderbilt died, his family controlled the arteries of American trade, and the profits kept flowing. But the same single-minded drive that created the fortune would soon leave it dangerously exposed. William Henry Vanderbilt, who inherited nearly the entire fortune from his father in 1877, faced a choice that would define the family's future. When he died in 1885, the estate had swelled to over $200 million. But instead of following his father's example and concentrating the wealth, William divided it almost equally among his 4 sons: Cornelius II, William Kissam, Frederick, and George Washington Vanderbilt II. Each received a share worth roughly $50 million, along with cash bequests and slices of the railroad empire. The decision reflected the conventions of the era: sons as equals, daughters with smaller settlements, and no legal tools to bind the fortune together across generations. There were no dynasty trusts, no holding companies, and no restrictions on selling or subdividing assets. The New York Central Railroad stock, which had been the family's golden goose, was now split 4 ways, making it vulnerable to outside influence and market pressures. Probate records from the time show the transfer of tens of thousands of shares directly into the names of the heirs. Within a few years, the family's control over the railroad began to weaken as shares were sold to fund new estates, art collections, and personal ambitions. The equal division was intended to preserve harmony, but it set off a chain reaction. With every generation, the shares would be split again, each time diluting both the wealth and the authority that came with it. By early 1900, dozens of grandchildren and great-grandchildren held pieces of the original fortune, but no one had the power, the incentive, to protect the whole. The structure that had once concentrated unimaginable power in one pair of hands was now dissolving into fragments, each one just large enough to tempt, but never enough to sustain the empire built by a single mind. Alva Vanderbilt understood that money alone wouldn't open the doors of New York's old guard. In the spring of 1883, she set out to prove that the Vanderbilts could buy more than railroads. They could buy their way into society. Her weapon of choice was the most extravagant party the city had ever seen. The invitation list for Alva's costume ball read like a who's who of the Gilded Age, but it was the spectacle that made headlines. She spent more than $250,000, over $7 million today, on a single night at 660 Fifth Avenue. The house was transformed into a palace of mirrors and silk, with 1,200 guests in costumes ranging from Marie Antoinette to medieval knights. Champagne flowed, orchestras played, and the Astors, once the gatekeepers of New York society, were forced to attend or risk being left behind. This was not just a party, it was a declaration. The Vanderbilts would not be content with business power. They wanted social dominance, and they were willing to pay any price. That same hunger for status soon spread through the family. Art dealers from Paris and London found eager buyers in the Vanderbilt heirs, who spent freely on paintings, tapestries, and rare books. By 1905, the family's collective art spending had soaring past $12 million, filling their homes with treasures, but draining the income that once flowed from railroad dividends. The pursuit of legitimacy became a kind of competition. Newport summers meant building ever larger mansions, each one designed to outshine the last. European trips turned into shopping sprees, with trunks packed full of silks and jewels. The fortune that had been built on discipline and calculation was now being funneled into display. For the Vanderbilts, social acceptance came at a staggering cost, and the family's money, once a source of power, became the fuel for an endless show of opulence. George Washington, Vanderbilt II, set out to build something beyond even his family's wildest ambitions. In 1889, he began work on Biltmore, a country estate in the hills of North Carolina that would become the largest private home in America. The project quickly outgrew its original budget. What started as a $2 million plan ballooned to more than $5 million before the doors even opened in 1895. Imported marble, custom ironwork, and formal gardens designed by Frederick Law Olmsted sent costs soaring. At its peak, the estate employed more than 1,000 workers and covered over 146,000 acres, an empire within an empire. But the real shock came after construction. Biltmore's annual upkeep reached $250,000 by the early 1900s, the equivalent of more than $7 million a year today. Heating, staff salaries, property taxes, and constant repairs drained cash at a relentless pace. The estate required a full-time staff of over 30 just to keep the house running, plus dozens of gardeners and farmers to tend the grounds. Even for a Vanderbilt, these were staggering numbers. Biltmore was not the only monument to ambition. In Newport, Rhode Island, the family built the Breakers, a 70-room summer palace completed in 1895 at a cost of $7 million. Marble House, another Newport property, rivaled European royal residences in its opulence. Each new mansion raised the bar for luxury, and with it, the ongoing bills. Unlike stocks or businesses, these estates could not be sold off in pieces. Their value was locked up in stone and land, while their costs kept coming due. By the turn of the century, the family's income from railroads and investments was being consumed by these properties. What had once been a symbol of triumph became a financial trap. The mansions stood as proof that even the greatest fortune could be undone not by a single disaster, but by the slow, steady drain of beauty that could not pay for itself. In 1913, Congress rewrote the rules of American wealth. The ratification of the 16th Amendment gave Washington the power to tax personal income for the first time. The law's opening shot seemed minor, a flat 1% on incomes over $3,000. But for families like the Vanderbilts, whose fortunes flowed from railroad dividends and investment income, the change was anything but small. A single heir earning $5 million a year in dividends now owed $50,000 to the federal government, a sum that would only grow as rates climbed. Within a few years, the so-called drag on Vanderbilt wealth became relentless. By 1920, wartime surcharges and new brackets pushed effective tax rates for the richest Americans above 40%. For a Vanderbilt collecting $5 million in income, the annual tax bill could reach $2 million. Money that once stayed in family accounts now vanished to Washington. Estate taxes soon followed, slicing off another piece with every generational transfer. The impact was immediate and permanent. For decades, the family's railroad shares had produced untaxed streams of cash, fueling both mansions and social ambitions. Now, every dividend check arrived lighter. The federal government, newly empowered, had become a silent partner in every Vanderbilt fortune. What had once seemed like an inexhaustible inheritance turned into a shrinking pool, drained not just by spending, but by a tax code designed to keep fortunes from ever growing so large again. George Washington Vanderbilt II died in March 1914 at just 51 years old. He had poured his inheritance into Biltmore, the grand estate in North Carolina, but left no clear successor with his vision or discipline. The loss came at a moment when the family's fortunes were already under pressure from new taxes and the growing costs of their estates. Within months, the management of Biltmore and other Vanderbilt properties shifted to professional outsiders, lawyers, accountants, and estate managers hired to keep the machinery running. These new stewards brought order, but not the entrepreneurial drive that had once built the empire. Decisions that once belonged to a single determined mind now required committee meetings and legal reviews. The family's railroad shares, once tightly controlled, became just another asset in a portfolio managed by people with no personal stake in the Vanderbilt name. As the original heirs aged and passed away, each departure left the fortune more exposed, with fewer family members willing or able to lead. The unity that had once protected the Vanderbilt wealth dissolved, replaced by a patchwork of interests and priorities. Without strong leadership, the family's ability to adapt to new financial realities faded, leaving their holdings vulnerable to the shocks that lay ahead. The stock market crash of 1929 delivered the final blow to what remained of the Vanderbilt fortune. In a matter of months, the value of investments tied to railroads and real estate collapsed. By some estimates, the family's portfolio lost more than 70% of its value. The mansions that once symbolized triumph became impossible to maintain. In May 1930, Biltmore, the largest private home in America, opened its doors to the public for the first time. For just $1, visitors could stroll through rooms that once cost millions to build and maintain, a desperate attempt to generate income and keep the estate afloat. Other family homes did not fare as well. The grand palaces along Fifth Avenue were sold off or demolished, their land repurposed for apartment buildings and offices. The family's railroad holdings slipped away, and by 1970, the New York Central was bankrupt, its assets absorbed by Conrail and Amtrak. The name that once dominated American industry now survived mostly in history books and on college campuses. Yet not everything vanished. Vanderbilt University, founded in 1873, with a $1 million gift from the Commodore, still thrives as a leading institution. The Biltmore estate continues as a tourist destination, though no longer owned outright by the family. Today, the combined net worth of all living Vanderbilt descendants is estimated at less than $50 million. There are no dynasty trusts, no secret vaults of old money, just a legacy of ambition, excess, and a lesson about how even the greatest fortunes can fade. Today, over 70% of inherited wealth disappears within 3 generations, a pattern the Vanderbilts made infamous. As fortunes shift faster than ever, the real question is not how much wealth can be built, but how long any legacy can last. In a world obsessed with instant riches, endurance, not excess, remains the rarest currency. What would you protect if your fortune could vanish tomorrow?